Welcome, wanderers of the dark, to echoes from the campfire, where whispered tales twist into nightmares, and every flicker of firelight hides a story waiting to consume you. Here, legends are reborn, fears take shape, and the echoes of the past refuse to stay buried. Gather close, but beware. Some stories don't just end, they linger. Are you ready to listen? Tonight, the Apocryphal Collective presents The Room That Wasn't There.
The Thompsons' house had always been ordinary. 2 stories of creaking floorboards, mismatched wallpaper, and a drafty attic that no one ever bothered to explore. It sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac where the loudest noise came from the occasional bark of the neighbor's dog or the buzz of a lawnmower on Saturday mornings. The Thompsons were the kind of family who blended into the fabric of suburbia without effort. Nothing extraordinary ever happened to them, until the room appeared. It was a Thursday morning when Eleanor Thompson noticed it. She was carrying a basket of laundry down the second-floor hallway when she saw a door that hadn't been there before. At first, she thought she must have been mistaken. The hallway had always had 3 doors, one to her bedroom, one to her son Caleb's room, and one to the bathroom. But now there was a 4th door wedged neatly between Caleb's room and the bathroom. It was plain white with no handle, only a small brass keyhole glinting in the morning light. "Richard," Eleanor called, her voice shaking slightly. Her husband's muffled reply came from downstairs. She left the laundry basket where it was and hurried to find him. Richard was in the kitchen fixing a cup of coffee. He looked up, concerned, as she entered. There's a new door upstairs," she said, struggling to find the right words. He frowned. "What do you mean, a new door?" "I mean exactly that. There's a door in the hallway that wasn't there yesterday. You have to come see it." Richard followed her upstairs, coffee mug in hand. When they reached the hallway, he stopped in his tracks, staring at the door. "That wasn't there before," he said, his voice low. "I told you," Eleanor whispered. "What is it? How does a door just appear?" "Maybe it's a prank. Someone could have—" He trailed off, realizing how absurd the suggestion sounded. The door was built seamlessly into the wall, as if it had always been part of the house. Caleb's bedroom door creaked open, and their 8-year-old son peeked out, rubbing his eyes. "What's going on?" he asked sleepily. "Nothing, sweetie," Eleanor said quickly. "Go back to bed." "It's morning," Caleb pointed out, his gaze shifting to the new door. "Where did that come from?" "We don't know," Richard admitted, stepping closer to examine it. He knocked lightly. The sound was hollow, as if the door led to an empty space. "Do you think it opens?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Only one way to find out," Richard said. He tried to turn the keyhole with his fingers, but it didn't budge. "We'll need a key." That evening, the door was all the Thompsons could talk about. They debated calling a locksmith or even a contractor to investigate, but something about the door felt private, as if it was meant for them and them alone. Eleanor couldn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The image of the door burned into her mind. Around midnight, she got up, unable to resist the pull any longer. She crept into the hallway, her bare feet silent on the wooden floorboards. The door seemed to glow faintly in the dark, its keyhole almost winking at her. She crouched down to peer through it, expecting to see nothing. But what she saw made her gasp. It was her wedding day. She was standing at the altar, Richard beside her, both of them laughing as the minister fumbled with the rings. But something was wrong. The colors were too bright, too vivid, and the air seemed to shimmer as if the scene were underwater. She pulled back, her heart racing. That wasn't how she remembered her wedding. The next morning, Eleanor told Richard what she had seen. At first, he was skeptical, but curiosity got the better of him. That afternoon, he knelt before the door and peered through the keyhole. What he saw wasn't his wedding day. It was his childhood bedroom, the one he hadn't seen in decades. He could make out every detail: the posters on the wall, the stack of comic books on the desk, the toy spaceship he'd lost when he was 10. And there, sitting on the bed, was a boy who looked just like him, but older, with a weary expression that didn't belong on a child. Richard stumbled back, shaking his head. It's impossible," he said. Caleb, who had been eavesdropping from the top of the stairs, decided to take a look for himself. Before his parents could stop him, he darted forward and pressed his eye to the keyhole. "What do you see?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. "It's me," Caleb said softly. "But I'm bigger. I'm in a room with lots of books and a big desk. There's a window, and outside it's dark. But the sky has these weird lights, like green and purple streaks." Eleanor and Richard exchanged a look. None of them could explain what was happening, but one thing was clear. The room showed memories, or perhaps visions. But whose, and why? Days turned into weeks, and the door became an obsession. The Thompsons took turns looking through the keyhole, each of them seeing different scenes. Eleanor saw a daughter she had never had. Richard saw a version of himself working in an office he didn't recognize. And Caleb saw what looked like an alien landscape with 2 suns. Each vision felt vivid, real, yet completely foreign. One night, unable to resist any longer, Richard decided to force the door open. He grabbed a crowbar from the garage and pried at the edges. Eleanor begged him to stop, but he couldn't. With a loud crack, the door swung inward, revealing nothing but darkness. A cold wind rushed out, carrying with it whispers that neither of them could understand. Caleb, who had been watching from the stairs, screamed and ran to his room. Eleanor pulled Richard back, slamming the door shut. "We shouldn't have done that," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. That night, the whispers continued, seeping through the walls. The Thompsons huddled together in their bedroom, unable to sleep. By morning, the door was gone. The hallway walls were smooth, as if it had never been there. The door was gone, but something had changed. At first, it was little things. Caleb would pause in the middle of playing with his toys, his small hands trembling as though he'd forgotten what he was doing. He started waking up at odd hours, whispering to himself. Then came the drawings. Eleanor found them scattered around his room, pages filled with crude sketches of the door, of strange landscapes with twin suns and curling shadows that stretched too far. But it was the faces that unsettled her the most. They weren't just human. Some had elongated skulls, hollow eyes, mouths too wide for their faces. Others were nothing but swirling voids wrapped in tattered cloaks, watching. One morning, she found Caleb sitting at his desk, scribbling frantically. "Sweetheart," she called softly. He didn't answer. He just kept drawing. Eleanor walked over and gently touched his shoulder. The moment her fingers brushed him, he let out a blood-curdling scream. His eyes flew open, and Eleanor staggered back. His pupils had shrunk to pinpricks, his face twisted in terror. "They saw me," he sobbed. "They know I looked. I didn't mean to, but they know." "Who knows, baby?" Eleanor knelt beside him, trying to steady her voice. "The people in the room," Caleb whispered, his voice raw. "I think they were waiting for you and Dad, but now they're looking at me instead." Richard and Eleanor tried to reassure him, telling themselves it was just a child's imagination, but then he started sleepwalking. One night, Eleanor woke to the sound of soft footsteps creaking down the hallway. She turned over, reaching for Richard, but he wasn't in bed. She got up and padded toward Caleb's room. His door was open. The hallway light flickered. Richard stood in front of the wall where the door had once been. Caleb was next to him, his small hand pressed against the wallpaper. "Richard," Eleanor whispered, "what are you doing?" Richard turned his head slightly, but his gaze didn't meet hers. His face was blank, his expression eerily peaceful. Then Caleb spoke. "They said I can come inside now." Eleanor's stomach turned to ice. She lunged forward, reaching for her son, but the moment her fingers touched his pajamas, the wall shuddered. The wallpaper curled, blackened, peeled away. The door that wasn't there yesterday was there again, its edges pulsing like a living thing, the brass keyhole weeping a dark, ink-like substance. The door swung inward. The darkness inside breathed. Before Eleanor could react, Caleb stepped forward. "Baby, no!" She grabbed him, yanking with all her strength, but it was like pulling against a tide. Richard was frozen, staring at the black abyss beyond the threshold. Caleb turned his head slightly to look at her. His lips parted as if to say something. Then, in a single horrible instant, he was gone. The door slammed shut. They called the police. They searched the entire house. They tore apart the walls, the floors, the attic, everywhere. No trace of Caleb. No evidence of forced entry. Nothing. To the world, it looked like their son had simply disappeared. The police considered Eleanor and Richard prime suspects in a missing persons case, but the court of public opinion had already convened and cast judgment. Eleanor and Richard were social pariahs, disavowed by the very community they helped build. Emotions eventually lowered to a simmer, mostly conspiratorial in nature. The general opinion was that Caleb was kidnapped that fateful night, perhaps by someone they knew. But Eleanor knew better. The room had taken him. She and Richard didn't speak much. He threw himself into work, barely coming home. Eleanor spent her days sitting outside Caleb's room, waiting, listening. Sometimes, late at night, she would hear his voice.
Mommy.
Mom. Soft, distant, calling from the other side of the wall. Sometimes she
Mom?
almost answered, but
Please
she knew
help
if she
me.
did, the door would
I'm
return.
on the other
then-
side of the door. Let me through.
The fire dims, but the echoes remain. If you've enjoyed this tale, let the darkness know. Like, subscribe, and step deeper into the unknown. Until next time, keep the fire burning, because in the silence the stories are always waiting.